Alright, so as I was bleeding my brakes, I wasn't paying attention to the level in the reservoir of the brake master cylinder. And the level dropped so low that air was introduced into the master cylinder. Now the brake pedal goes all the way to the floor when I try to depress it. So that means I have to flush the air out of the brake master cylinder. Now, the traditional way to do that is to remove the brake master cylinder, put it in a vise, and buy a brake master cylinder bleeder kit. You run tubes from each of the exit points back into the top reservoir, and then you pump it using like a screwdriver or something to force the compression of what the brake pedal would normally be doing. That enters the piston into the brake master cylinder, forces the brake fluid out through the tubes and into the top cylinder, and you can see the bubbles becoming less and less frequent when you do it. Well, I found online a great technique where you don't have to pull the brake master cylinder from the car, which is something I want to avoid at all costs because my brake master cylinder is very difficult to access. I'd have to remove all kinds of stuff. It requires special tools, very tight clearances. It's not an easy thing to get at. And basically, the method I'll be using is I'll be running a vinyl tube, 5/16 OD, 3/16 ID. It's a 10-foot tube. I'll be running it from the bleeder nipple on the brake caliper of my left front wheel to the reservoir of my brake master cylinder. Now, as I pump my brakes with that closed system, or it's actually a loop, the fluid will get pressed into the brakes. It's going to go down, and it's going to go into this caliper, and it's going to start working its way through the tube. With each consecutive pump, more and more brake fluid is going to be leaving the caliper, entering the tube, and working its way down the tube, and eventually working its way up and back into the brake master cylinder reservoir. And if we do it enough times, eventually all of the air in the master cylinder reservoir will work its way down and out of that reservoir. What's great about this method is you don't have to pull it. You don't have to pull the brake master cylinder from the car, and a vacuum is created because this line goes from a plugged bleeder valve all the way into the brake reservoir, and air can't be reintroduced back into the line because it's a closed system, because the other end of the tube is inserted inside the liquid all the way in the brake fluid reservoir. So air, when you release the brake pedal, won't be able to come back through the tube, back into the caliper, and back into the car, reintroducing new air. Instead, it's going to pull air from the reservoir, or it's going to pull new fluid from the reservoir when you release the brake pedal. Now, some brake fluid will probably still come up from the brake lines, but the small percentage that does come down through the reservoir over time will start to make its way out through this loop, and over time the reservoir will get brake fluid that did come down through the reservoir feeding back into it, and so eventually all the air that's in the brake master cylinder should be flushed out fully. And this is something that I found two different sources that said that it worked. Actually, three different people said it worked. So anytime I research things online, I don't go based on something one person said. I try to find multiple people who have confirmed it. So I think that running the tube all the way from the caliper all the way back to the master cylinder is the best way to do it. Not only that, but you don't have to buy like 2 or 3 liters of brake fluid that way. And I've already flushed my brake lines. This is a post brake line flush job, so this is all going to be new fluid that I'd rather reuse. Plus, you're getting the fluid making its way all the way back around and back into the cylinder, so you don't have to keep pouring liter after liter of new fluid constantly back into your brake reservoir as you're pumping the brakes. And that's also beneficial because when you're pumping the brakes, you might not realize when you pump too much and now you just reintroduce air back into the reservoir again because it got too low. So you don't have to refill it all the time using this method. So I think this is actually faster because you're refilling it as you pump. This fluid will be refilling the reservoir automatically as I pump. I think that's even better for me. Let me start out by removing the rubber thing, okay. And since I've already cracked these bleeders once, they won't be seized on here or anything, so. Alright, got it on. Just so that I don't introduce any debris into the brake master cylinder reservoir in this process, I'm going to put a coffee filter over the end that's going into the cylinder, and that will catch any debris. Even though this is new fluid, there could still be debris in the brake lines and little particles I don't want entering the brake master cylinder and messing with the seal or ruining any part of the master cylinder or the ABS system. So that's just going to be a safety precaution. I'm going to get a coffee filter. Be right back. Use a twist tie to secure this filter onto my tube. There you go. Alright. You can see how bad this job is trying to remove this master cylinder. It's so far down there. I mean, I can't even fit my hand, I can't even fit a fist down here. And it just would be really hard to deal with. Okay, so we'll get this down here. And we're going to need to top that off with brake fluid. Okay, I filled it as high as it can possibly go. I filled it right to here. Okay. Not a single bubble, so that just proves I did a good job on my brake bleed. The only issue then is at the very end on the last wheel, I bled too much, didn't top off the reservoir, introduced fluid from the top down, or air from the top down, so you won't see that right away because the air is only in the brake fluid master cylinder. That's the only place air is. Alright, I'm going to pump the brake. Probably going to have to pump it a lot. That's so cool! let me make sure. Making sure the fluid doesn't go down too much. I'm going to check it very frequently because I'm totally paranoid right now. Wow, it's really making its way up that hose. Alright, let me check it again. Everything looks good. Oh, I gotta top this off. I'm not playing around, man. I'm keeping this thing topped off. Yeah, the air that was in this line is entering the fluid reservoir and bubbling out. But eventually the oil that's in this line now is going to be working its way up the line and back into the reservoir. And eventually, as oil's leaving the car, it needs to come from somewhere. It's dropping down the reservoir and into the car, or into the master cylinder. Alright, I'm just going to keep checking it. I won't have to fill it as frequently once the brake fluid reaches the cylinder from the bottom up. And it's halfway there now. If this works, it's going to put the myth of bench bleeding to rest. That will be never again. Bench bleeding kits will go out of business. Everyone's going to bleed their master cylinder this way, including on a new install. That's how important this video is. It's going to change the world of brakes forever. Forever change. Alright, I just topped it off. Keeping it topped. You know what? I kind of like the idea of showing you guys how this is proceeding. So here it is. You can see there's little gaps. It's all the way up to here now. You can see it. So it's about to make the turn and enter the car soon. Yeah. Oh, snaps. There it goes. It's making its way there. Let me see here. I'm going to check the fluid level again. I'm just going to paranoidly do that constantly. I won't need to do it again, like I said, for very much longer, because once this fluid reaches, it's going to be cycling itself. And there we go. Bubbles leaving the system. Eventually it'll become solid fluid, I think. So we have a continuous cycle, theoretically. This will completely empty the master cylinder. Let me sit in the car now. I don't really feel like I need to drive now. Okay, I lied. I'm too paranoid not to keep an eye on it. I'll just kind of chill right here in the doorway. I didn't see any debris, so my brake line was really clean. I feel like theoretically this should eventually have 0 bubbles. Once all the bubbles have worked its way through, this will become a completely closed system as far as bubbles go. There won't be any air left because no air can be introduced that wasn't already in the hose when I first began. There's no place for air to get in. It's just not possible. Oh, I do see a tiny particle inside the hose working its way through. So it's a good thing I put the filter on. In fact, I'll show you guys the particle so you can see how big they are. You can see it right below the turn, right there. And you can see one right there. I don't know if you can actually see it. Maybe if I pump the brakes, you'll see it. You'll see them move. Can you see it? Maybe I'll catch it when it crosses here. Yeah, you can see some little debris right there. Wow, we're really running out of bubbles here, guys. All the bubbles are almost completely gone now. So I think this is where it really becomes great. Plus, all that debris coming out of here, I feel really good about that because that's basically cleaning out the brake lines even more. All right, there's officially 0 air in the system. I don't know how long you have to keep going after you don't see any air. what you guys are saying is I can't really read. They will still be soft because the bleeder is open. Once you close the bleeder, they should be normal. Really? Oh! Because every time I compress the brake pedal, I'm moving fluid all the way through this circuit, so they're not going to be hard. They'll only be as hard to press as the brakes that I'm moving through. That makes complete sense. Great point, TXC. Good eye. Good eye for detail there. I completely agree. That sounds absolutely logical. I'm still going to bleed all my brakes with my vacuum bleeder after this is done, just because we don't know the extent of air that got in to the system earlier. Maybe that's overkill though. By the way, I'm only pressing about 2/3. I'm not flooring the pedal because I heard that's bad for the master cylinder. You shouldn't do that very often. And it doesn't go to the floor very easily at all. It did before, but I mean it's getting quite stiff. I imagine I'll get less and less debris coming through, which is why it's good to keep cycling it, so we can filter out all the little rust particles that you weren't able to see, but I saw them. I guess the camera wasn't good enough zoom. I'm not seeing any more rust particles at the moment, but I'm just keeping my eye out. Trying to determine where the... Oh, I see some fluid moving in this back corner, so it is topped off. Yeah, it's well above max. I want to extract this without making a mess on either side. So I'm gonna have to think about that. Okay, I can take this out. So I'm going to put plastic bag all around. And I'll make a little nest of paper towel as well. Some fluid from here. So I'm going to put the filter in here, and I'm going to lift this out and then put it right into here. I might not spill a drop. Okay, this is supposed to not be on here. This blue thing is supposed to go inside there. Okay, so we got that. Close the bleeder before you disconnect. Okay, that's a great idea. I think now would be the perfect time to close the bleeder. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. While everything's full. Okay, righty-tighty. Okay. So I'm going to drain it as much as I can to give a little gap of air here, and then I can suck it out or do whatever. Okay, so I'm undoing the little twist tie I put on here. Twist tie removed. Alright, so not a drop dropped out of here, and that's because there's still a vacuum with the bleeder. As soon as I pull that, this is going to come flying out. So just to be safe, I'm going to wrap some paper towel around it. Ha! Not one drop. Alright, now we're just going to let it drain out. And we're draining it back into the brake fluid container. Just lift this side and alright. I'm willing to try it. I'll see how the brake pedal feels. If it feels spongy, I know I need to flush them. If it feels very firm, I'm going to try test driving it. Alright, so it's still very, very spongy. It doesn't go all the way to the floor anymore, but it goes down quite a bit. Yeah, I removed the bird nest plastic and paper, and I did cap the master cylinder. That's correct. So, since I now have to flush all the brakes, I still feel better that the brakes at least didn't go pedal all the way to the floor. It tells me I got a lot of air out, one way or another. So let's begin. What I do know is I'm thoroughly bleeding every single one of these, so I'm leaving no doubt. If this does not work, then we know there's either air in the master cylinder despite my attempts, or there's air in the ABS system. And if that happens, oh, I'll have to pull the master cylinder and bench bleed it. You know what? I should just have the attitude right now. I really hope this work didn't succeed so that I can enjoy the wonderful privilege of having to pull the master cylinder and bench bleed it. That's the attitude. I wouldn't want to rob myself of the opportunity to do my first bench bleed ever. Wow. So I sure hope this doesn't work, guys. I'm crossing my fingers and just hoping my brake pedal just sponges right to the floor. Hardly any braking whatsoever. That's my goal. Alright guys, the brake pedal has about 2 inches of give. It's not stiff. It does seem worse than when I first started this whole project, but it's nowhere near going to the floor like it was before I bled these last 3 brakes. It now is, I don't feel like I can drive it like this, in other words. In fact, it could be how it was to begin with, but it does give a little bit. It's nowhere near going like halfway to 2/3 down. There's a little bit of give and then it starts. So I'm going to test drive it now. I feel safe enough with it to test drive it. I'll be back. We did it! We did it! Guys, it's perfect. I can tell. It's perfect. It took me a while to get the feel for it. I had to drive around for a bit just to get used. Like, when you forget how the brakes are supposed to feel, it takes some time to remember, like, yeah, this is how they used to feel. So they were never really stiff brakes. You always had to press down a little bit. They eased on. They're really smooth. They're not. It's not like a hard pedal where you just immediately stop as soon as you touch the pedal. So bottom line is, mission success, huge win, and we don't have to bench bleed it. And we proved that that system where you connect the hose to your reservoir from your front left wheel, caliper bleeder, running a direct line and pumping the brakes, that did in fact flush the master cylinder, and my brake pedal is back to normal. Everything's perfect. We flushed all the brakes after that, and it's perfect. So wow, I'm really pleased with this. I'm really happy.